Welcome to the Ohio Arts Council's Rife Gallery programming series for our current show, Shared State, curated by Jordan Busher and Natalie Leneath. Today, we are thrilled to present the artist Laura Truitt. As a brief reminder, everyone tuning in today is in listen-only mode, so feel free to utilize that chat function to ask your questions, and we'll be sure to get to them at the end of the talk. Also, please keep in mind that because we're presenting from separate locations, there might be variation of bandwidth. If one of us freezes up or the sound fluctuates. Thanks in advance for bearing with us, and welcome, Laura.
Thank you. Um, Thank you for the opportunity to speak about my work, Kat. And thank you to Natalie and Jordan for including me in the exhibition Shared State, which is a fabulous exhibition. And I'm really pleased to have my work in the presence of all the other artists in that exhibition. So that's a really great opportunity. So thank you. Um, I will say I'm a better listener than I am a talker. So if I fumble a little bit, please excuse me. Um, I guess I will just start. We'll see if I have to click on it or if it goes forward. I do have to click on it. Aha. Okay. So I grew up in Yellow Springs, Ohio. I'm from Ohio, and I went to college in Baltimore, Maryland. Undergrad, spent a year in Scotland while I was there, and got my BA. And then after college, I moved out west. And actually, before I say all that, I do want to say I'm going to just give you a little bit of background onto like how my work landed on landscape, we'll say, and then it's my talk is sort of chronological, but I've also structured it in terms of the different ways that I've approached landscape. So I'll just say that's kind of the way it's going to go. So this is before grad school. I moved out to Colorado, and I think that summer we maybe traveled across Kansas 3 times. And that experience really got me excited about storms, and I started painting and drawing storms at that point. And I did that for probably in between undergrad and grad was 8 years. I did that for 8 years. We lived in Boulder, Colorado. And I was really interested in this idea of the sublime, the beautiful, and the terrible at the same time, and really focused on storms and the huge sky that becomes abstract. And I was selling a lot of these. I was making about a third of my income off of selling storm paintings. I was talking to storm chasers. So there was like a couple people in Colorado as well as Oklahoma that I was talking to, and they would let me use their photographs. And then I went to the Vermont Studio Center. Oh, sorry, I skipped this one. I went to the Vermont Studio Center in 2007. I went twice, once in 2015 and once in 2007. But in 2007, I went in January. It was like negative 25 degrees. It was very, very cold. But I had some really intense time in the studio, and my work started to change into more aftermath of storms. You know, what happens after the storm. And I will say part of that is that my mom was in the Xenia tornado in 1973 or 74. So I had some photographs already that she had taken, and it was sort of part of my personal lore, I guess we'll say, this aftermath stuff. So I took these back to Boulder, and my gallerist at the time said, those are too dark. I can't hang them. I can't sell them. And then that's when I was like, okay, I'll go to grad school. I want to follow this thread. I'd met all these people in Vermont that were in grad school. I just graduated, and I was excited about that opportunity. So along with this being a little bit chronological, I've also separated out into these different access points for landscape. And I'm saying landscape here, but I really mean landscape painting because it's really about painting. When I applied to grad school, there was a school I applied to that I didn't get into, and I emailed the professor and asked why I didn't get in, and she said, "Well, we don't take landscape." And it was really dismissive. And at the time, I was like, you know, it sort of got lit a fire under me to like focus on that. So landscape as an action, language as a describer of environmental concerns, abstraction, color exploration, network, and experience. So we'll cover some of those. It's somewhat chronological, like I said. So as an action, in grad school, I started playing with actually images from Ohio of these farms and buildings that were sort of rotting into the ground at the same rate, meaning they were probably built at the same time. So, building these structures with paint and thin paint, and then overgrowing them with really thick paint. And these were images that I think I sent my mother-in-law out to get. So she had like personal connections to these places and memories of them when she was younger. So this idea of paint decomposing and really thin washes and then thick on top. And I was also, so that's like deconstruction. I was also constructing, creating maquettes that out of sticks and clay, and then taking pictures and then drawing and then creating paintings from that. So, this idea of really building a structure in the painting as well, even though, there's part of this that looks like it might be falling down too. I mean, I think that's part of my work too, is sort of sitting in the middle there. And this is part of that same group of paintings, although I think I used photos with this one too of spaces around. But also, formally, there's a lot of thin layers with thick paint on top. So landscape as an action, and then landscape as a language. I did a whole series of monotypes and charcoal drawings that became an iconography. We had an artist at Colorado State, which is where I went to grad school. We had an artist named Matt Mulliken. I guess I didn't realize that would be hard to see. His name is Matt Mulliken, and a lot of his work are these really complex iconographies that he creates, big installed exhibitions. So I really liked that idea of trying to make landscape into my own language. Here's a city far away, here's snow in the woods, and these are ideas of landscape that then could be put together into a larger artwork. Some monotypes and drawings, and then conglomerating them all together to try and make a sentence. I mean, it sort of works. I think this could be revisited in another way, but it was fun to kind of take it apart, what I was doing, and trying to figure out my own painting language in terms of landscape. And then I was also had just become a mother for the first time. I had my last year of grad school, and he would cry and wail every night. So I would take him outside, and he would calm down if he was like on his back looking up at the canopies. So I had this fantasy that what he really loved was the contrast of the tree canopy. And I did a whole series of this. And I would say that these probably are the most abstract work that I've done, where the image is sort of completely pushed to the back or the foreground, and they're not really navigable by walking. They're sort of really formal and abstract. But that's where that came from, and it was fun to play with, and I think all of my work has some of this in there, but that is part of where that came from. Wait, am I clicking? I'm clicking. Okay. So the other thing I wanted to mention, in grad school, I was very influenced by the New Leipzig painters. These are 4 painters who all went to a school in Leipzig, Germany called the New Leipzig School. And Suzanne Kuhn is the one on the top right. And I saw her work in person at the Museum of Contemporary Art, and I just loved the way you could navigate, you could walk through her paintings. Um, but you were also obstructed. It was like you're trying to walk through and you're sort of blocked in certain places, but there's always this point that's in the far distance as well. Um, and I did an interview with her for my thesis. So she would say she's not part of that group. The New Leipzig Painters is really a group created by art critics or art historians. And she would say she's not really part of that group, but she was in the school at the same time. She had the same professors, et cetera. So you can see there's a lot of perspective in this group of artists, and the story that's been written about them is that they were trained in the social realist style, or their professors were trained in the social realist style. And then the wall fell in 1989 and sort of exploded the art scene there with all these classically trained artists. But these artists in particular were sort of around the same time and doing these really cool versions of spaces. The other thing I want to mention about Suzanne Kuhn is that she often puts art historical references into her artwork. Sometimes they're really direct. It's almost like the same painting. She did a version of Vermeer's Love Letter that's almost the same. And I really, I was studying art history at the time, so I felt like, oh, I recognize that, it felt like a connection. And I asked her about it. And what she said was that it's not really supposed to be an inside joke, or like you're not supposed to like get it really. It's more that what she said, I kind of liked her quote. She said, could it be that painting meant the same for a 17th century Dutch painter as it does today? Could it be that a painter back then was discussing, investigating the same problems that we as painters are discussing today, but just in a different political, social, and cultural environment? And I love that idea of just this connection where, the what we're painting today is the very same stuff that people in Western art maybe were painting 400 years ago. So that was like a cool part of her work. So landscape has a description of environmental, what did I say? I can't even read it because of the windows, but concerns, I think, environmental concerns. I will say that like these are destruction studies, and to some extent, I don't think I I did these in grad school, and I don't think I could really defend destruction that wasn't closer to my own experience, mainly because it edges close to what some people call ruin porn, or something where it's like reveling in the beauty of it without acknowledging the devastation that it causes. So where I get my images is important. And like I said, I think a lot of the storm stuff was sort of from huddling enough times in the basement as a kid and my mom being in a tornado, but they're not places that I have been or experienced. So I started looking at spaces and trying to look at environmental concerns that were really related to where I was living. So these were in Colorado. And the thing about Fort Collins and all those cities along the Front Range of Colorado is that they were just, and they still are, exploding in terms of construction. And like it's so fast, and it's happening at the same time as they're building massive fracking towers, especially in that eastern Colorado portion. So there were places in Greeley, Colorado, which is about an hour from Fort Collins, where they could light their water on fire because it had so much methane in the groundwater. And that was from the fracking that was happening out there. The companies would have privacy fences, so you couldn't see what they were doing during the day. They would only run them at night. And these were also, there were also all these spaces that were sort of rotting into the ground right next to things that were being like built up. So it was like this strange covering up of history or something. it's hard to put into words, obviously, which is probably why I ended up drawing it. This is from a beet factory, a sugar beet factory in eastern Colorado, which is one of the main industries there, and isn't really anymore. So a massive factory that was just falling apart next to these huge suburban developments at the same time. And the other thing, maybe more obviously, that happens out in the Mountain West is fire. This was in Boulder, a fire that happened there, and the thing that happens in the Mountain West is that folks build houses probably where they shouldn't. I mean, it's sort of destined to catch on fire with the way the winds are, the fact that lightning will definitely hit there. And then people build either developments or big houses. There was one in Colorado Springs after we left. I think that was national news because it was a big development that was in the mountains, and it was just completely destroyed by fire. Anyway, so that's another thing. I mean, we definitely evacuated in Fort Collins because of floods, and fires got really close to us. So it was always present for sure. Okay, so that was climate change, etc. Landscape as a vehicle for color exploration and connections to photography. Obviously, I've already talked about imagery and how important it is. I love photography, and I love a lot of the way that they approach color. This is Uta Barth on the left, who's a photographer, who I think is like a painterly photographer somehow. And I love her palettes. So often, at least with this painting, you can see I was looking at her photographs as a way to educate my own palette for this painting. In art history, we hear the trope that painting died in the 80s, apparently. But at the same time, Polaroids and like film photography sort of was changing in this time, and was like becoming anachronistic to how people were taking photographs. So I was working with Polaroids and paintings as this sort of that they were in it together, that sort of anachronistic mediums. So along with that, I did a whole project of paintings that are in the shape of Polaroids that are looking back to art history for palettes, which was a great learning experience for me. I felt like I learned so much about color just by studying other folks' color. Like the 4 Polaroids on the left are from a Vermeer painting. The color is, not the imagery. And the ones on the right are from a Morandi painting. The color, again, not the imagery. Susan Rothenberg is on the right of these, and Soutine's Flayed Ox. I love that painting and was looking at his color there. So I maybe like many grad students, I really loved Gerhard Richter, do love his work. And the thing that I love the most about it is that he was doing paintings like this simultaneously. They're both painted around the same time. I believe they were in the same show. And I do have a quote from somebody who wrote about his work, saying there's a tendency to discuss the art of the past 100 years in terms of binary oppositions, abstract versus figurative, conceptual versus craft-based, painting versus photography, and so on. And I feel like I was sold that story as a young artist, the Picasso fiction that everybody starts as a realist, and then eventually you become an abstract. When you mature, you become more abstract. So this was, permission to do both at the same time or none or mix them together. And I feel like that's sort of where I ended up personally, is that I sort of wanted to sit in between. So in between imagery that has context, that has history, like photography, but also in this painterly, more formal space as well. So these are thesis work in grad school. You can see a lot of fracking towers. Those red towers are what fracking towers look like. And it's funny, this one ended up at a winery in California. It's like, really? You want this one up there? Okay. Kind of funny. Um, and then drawings too. I wanted to mention that drawing is a big part of my practice. It was then, it is now. And I feel like there's so many ways to play in drawing, and trying to get that threshold space in drawing is really exciting for me. So these are part of that whole series as well. Okay, so landscape as a network. Um, this painting I did in 2011, and I was looking at Jeremy Bentham's Panopticon, which is an architectural theory where you have it's basically for a jail. You have prisoners around the outside, and then a central core in the building that can see everybody. So the prisoners can't see each other, but the central core can see everybody. And this was during the Arab Spring, so I was responding to this, hopeful idea that that networks could disrupt that central core. Basically, they could connect people when they weren't connected before. And I'm not sure if that holds true 15 years later. Maybe technology is not, and networks don't really give us that connection anymore. But that's what I was thinking about with this. And I am really interested in technology and also the robotic network and imagery. I love this artist, John Raffman. He did this project called nineeyes.com, which I believe is still up. So you could see it. And he would go, as soon as Google Street View uploaded a new section, he would go and find the weirdest, strangest, most surreal images and then put them up. And they're just wonderful. And, some of these Google would probably try to take down, because a lot of time it's like doubling or doing weird things that betray the fact that it's a robot taking the picture. So anyway, I love Street View. I love the anonymity that I feel like it gave, like an opportunity to use an unintelligent system. Of course, as we know, these systems are not as objective as we would hope. But I did start doing a whole series based on street views that were places I had been to, but then using the street view as a way to imbue meaning possibly into the places. So this is where my grandma grew up in California or lived, a place I lived in Glasgow, where my mom lived in Cleveland. So doing a lot of street view images and then trying to change the color and add things to it. Scotland, Denver, Jacoby Road in Yellow Springs, construction in Fort Collins. And then those became these big conglomerates of all these different street views kind of meshed together. These big highways and bridges in Colorado meshed with some of the suburban developments and McMansions that they were building. And sort of wilderness spaces with constructed spaces. I really love this one. And it's, I think I was looking at all these before, and I think it's partially because you get obstructed by the blue poles and have to navigate around them, just like Suzanne Kuhn, I think. think that's why I like them. I was also looking at street views of airports. I think, when I showed this a while ago, many years ago, I wrote how hopeful this painting was meant to be. I don't really see it as hopeful. No. So at some point, I thought that airports were kind of hopeful. But I also recognize that it's probably the most damaging thing to the environment that we do, fly. Um, and that was part of this too. So I was taking a lot of airports, they are also architectural marvels, and technological marvels in many ways, and sort of conglomerating them together. So this one was an airport one. And then this one, not this one, but the next one was, some private spaces mixed with public spaces. So thinking about what is owned and what is not owned, and especially in Colorado, that the BLM land is a key part of the wilderness, and there's a lot of pressure on it to sell mining rights and to sell grazing rights, etc. Land and water are a big deal out there. This is the other airport one. Oh, it's raining. And then I just wanted to make a note about drawing, which I talked about drawing before, but oftentimes I'm drawing or paint little paintings before I do the big painting. And I like to display them together because scale is such an important part of my work. The fact that you can walk into it or it fills your peripheral vision while you're standing there is really important, as well as with a small piece, you get up really close. So that sort of back and forth is an important piece. So I like to show them together. I've actually shown this big painting with a tiny little palette painting as well next to it. And this is the painting behind me. Yay. That's one of my favorite paintings that I've done. And the drawing is on the left. So, and I think this is around the time I started to kind of like really build from my images and maybe build out from the images a little bit, at least in this period. And I was also trying to draw in the painting. So process-wise, I was really playing with materials, oil pastel, and trying to add plaster and charcoal to paint, trying to see if I could get that drawing mark, that fresh drawing mark on a painting and get it to work. These are drawings with paintings on them. I would call them drawings with paintings, whereas this is a painting with a drawing. I don't know, it's all the same, right? But they're interrelated, but they are distinct sometimes. So these I was carefully painting out areas with gesso and then going over it with paint. I have now discovered paper called Arches oil paper, which handles paint and drawing together very well. So I don't have to carefully section out where I want to paint. Here's another one that has a lot of drawing in the actual painting. You can see the little studies for it up on the left. Those have oil pastel and charcoal and pencil. And then the one on the right has charcoal and a lot of other materials as well. So in 2018, we moved to Washington State. So we'd lived in Colorado for 15 years, and we moved further west to Washington State, just over the Montana-Idaho border in Spokane, Washington. And when we moved out there, it was like fire season when we moved. We were driving through the forest with our kids in the car, and there was a big electric, like, mobile sign that said, "Don't stop," because there was a forest fire happening. And we just drove through a forest fire to our new home. It was kind of apocalyptic. So fire became really present in our lives. But in Spokane, it wasn't necessarily fire because it wasn't in the mountains, but it was smoke. There was a lot of smoke. And I started this plane series using edges, borders, and edges that are reminiscent of a plane window, partly because I was flying a lot. Um, and that's how I was experiencing travel. Um, and um, and because it sort of felt like that's when you could really see some of the fire drama from where we were. So these are on birch panel with oil paint, and then they've got color pencil and paint on top. So it has this relationship to photography because it's a very photographic painting on the underlayer, and then this sort of painterly disruption on the top. And Spokane sits in this inversion. So all the smoke would collect in the Spokane area. So it would be really, really smoky during fire season. We just called it fire season because it was like the end of the summer for 3 or 4 months. It was just smoky all the time. You couldn't leave your home because it was like dangerous for everybody to leave, the particles in the air. So it was like an experience. We definitely didn't know it was going to be like that, and it was very essential to that place. It was part of that place for sure. Um, at the time, I did this painting too, which I think describes the domestic chaos that was happening in my life. I had 2 small children and a job that I was working 60 to 80 hours a week at. And this is just sort of how it felt. I haven't taken this thread much further than a few paintings, but I feel like that sort of describes what was happening at the time. And this also is sort of this trying to balance anything, not just organic and geometric, but time and work and life and kids and all that stuff. So this is sort of like sometimes just everything has to happen at once. And everything's true. You can't, another push, I guess, against that binary way of looking at the world. I was also looking at these borders and edges and floating into car windows, which I've continued with. This is called Zestimate is High. I was also thinking about how properties are bought and sold even in places where they shouldn't be. This was around the time of some of the California wildfires that just happened so fast. And the imagery is from Google Street View, but then the palette is my own. So just thinking about how we interact with the landscape and then also how land is marketed. Okay, so landscape as experience. I started working with the VR headset at this point, and I was a humanities digital fellow at Gonzaga, so I was teaching students with the VR headset in a drawing class to expand the drawing practice. So I had made these pair of paintings just to describe, sort of different ways of space. There's the one on the left, which is a painting, and then there's the one on the right, which is a painting of a painting with some virtual space in it. So this was just sort of a meta group of paintings. But it was sort of inspired by that VR headset. I have always been obsessed with I would love there to be video stickers that you could put in a painting That would be so amazing. Um, and they don't, that's not available yet, but I feel like I saw Brian Bress's work at the MCA in Denver, and his work is really amazing. Can you see it moving? Okay, excellent. So, I mean, his work is really long. It's like 20 to 30 minutes long. This is just a little clip, but he presents it like a painting and it refers to all this modernism and other movements, but he's usually got something moving behind it that's changing the composition. Um, but they're really powerful as video art goes, and sort of like painting. So I really loved his work. And the other experience that I had that sort of I thought um, sort of hit home how important experience can be to art was Meow Wolf in Santa Fe, which we went to in 2017, and it's an immersive space that was built by 7 artists in Santa Fe, who got $2 million from George R.R. Martin to renovate a bowling alley. And they made it has all this narrative and everything was made by them. It's not, um, you know, uh, it's just very magical and pretty weird and amazing and such a great experience. So I think they made their money back in like a year, the initial investment, because it just has exploded. And now they have a Meow Wolf in Denver and now in Las Vegas. And it's a big thing now. But at the time, for me, I felt like it was pretty new. I hadn't seen anything like that before. It was very awesome. So I do these little GIFs and things. This is just a little GIF, but again, I would love there to be video stickers. And I can imagine that being a wonderful way to experience painting. So I did a series of paintings that have accompanying GIFs. And I can see this might be hard to see with um, the strip of cameras, but it's a big painting. It's 48 by 60, and then it comes with a QR code that then you can look at. And it's still small on your phone, the GIF, so it's not ideal, but I think it gives a sense of like how you might imagine the painting moving, or another view of it to compare to. Here's another one. And then also in this last show that I had in Dayton, I had our old VR headset with the drawing inside so folks could get in there and play around and walk around the drawing. I'm going to try to move this around. This is similar. It's not the drawing that was in the headset, but it's similar. And you can see there's a website you can upload it to called Sketchfab. And there's lots of VR drawings there if you're ever interested in checking it out. This is my mother-in-law, who's she's a dancer, so of course she got really into the VR movement. And this was if that video didn't work, but it looked like it worked. Okay. So recently, I've been working with my own dash cam, not Google Street View, although sometimes, but I got my own dash cam. We moved back to Ohio from Washington State to take care of family. And it's been wonderful. We're really glad we were lucky enough to do that. And then I got a job at Oberlin, and I worked there for a couple of years as a visiting assistant professor, and I was driving 3 hours back and forth. So I got a dash cam and was recording, my experience of the landscape. Again, like, I'm very cognizant of the fact that I'm contributing to climate change by doing that kind of travel. But I also kind of love it. I mean, I love that I can get in my car and go travel. It's kind of a magical thing. It's inspiring sometimes. There's a lot of driving experiences that are lovely, but it was a lot of driving. It was probably more driving than I wanted to do. It definitely was more driving than I wanted to do. Anyway, so I had, it's funny. I didn't even think about I didn't know Dragona's work, and then when I saw and heard the lines, it was like, oh yeah, this is so cool. The connections, but these are more dash cam images, and I was driving at different times of the day, so that's what this is. But the lines are really for me interruption of the illusion of driving, right? We're like when we're driving, we're sort of separated from the landscape. It could be in a video game or something else. And the lines are an indication to break up the illusion a little bit. They also hint at speed and other things too. Um, and I did do a stop motion animation with with the dash cam images. I don't think it's great, but it's like doing the same thing in lots of different mediums. I sometimes can hone the idea and make it feel present in a way that can be effective. So that's kind of how I see working in all these different mediums, is that if they're okay, if they do, they hopefully get to the same idea in the long run, and it feels like another way to approach it. So I will also say about this, I took the dash cam photos, printed them out on a terrible copier, and then drew on top of them and then put them back into the computer. And I do really like that in and out part of stop motion. That you still have like this hand mark, this drawing mark that's physically there. It's not completely digital. This is the show that these pieces were in that are in the Rife Gallery right now. It was at the Buckham Gallery in 2024. So all those dash cam things, as well as these two big ones, which I'll talk about in a second. I also had some clay work, which was just another way of locating myself in space. So I dug clay in Yellow Springs and I dug clay in Oberlin and made these little cups and painted them with some of the colors that I was seeing on the drive. So another way of exploring being in a place, essentially. This is one of my newest ones down at the bottom. Gosh, I thought I could put it in a place where it was visible. That didn't work, but it's a really long dash cam with this construction on top. And I'm actually really excited about this direction. Maybe not so long and skinny, but this like really distinct construction on top of the dash cam. Also in the Rife show, there's the drawing that's on the far left, and I just wanted to talk about this Best Intention series, which is a series of drawing paintings that are related to a hike that I took repeatedly in Spokane, and every time the forest was going through some trauma or something different, either they'd had a windstorm, or things were being cut because they were managing the trail, or there was a fire and some of the trees were falling down because of that. So there was always like just this narrative that the park folk were trying to navigate too, which was kind of interesting. So that's where that drawing is originally from. This is one of the pieces that is in shared state at the Rife Gallery. And hopefully at this point, after listening to me drone on about landscape, you can look at this and be like, oh yeah, I see the dash cam, I see the obstructions, I see the constructions and the deconstructions and all the pieces and parts kind of coming together. Um, and the other one is similar, although this one comes from sort of a more personal place, and has to do with how we navigate big journeys in our life. I see this as the woods sort of opening that fence in a way, and then these other constructions maybe holding you back. So how do we navigate a big changes in our lives? So that's what that's about. And it's huge, and you can walk into it, which is exciting. Um, and oh, this one, which is very new. I don't know much to say about it, except that it's a building on Antioch College's campus, which is in transition. It's goes through struggle, and there's hope there, and lots of change. So it felt like an interesting building to reflect on. I don't know what to say about this one. I like it a lot. There's a break in the fence on 35, or no, it's on 675, and they've never fixed it. It's been there for years, years and years. And I kind of love it because I get to see it through the seasons, and it's like sort of, I don't know, so a metaphor for something. I'm not sure yet. This is a new painting, so I'm not sure what to say about it, except that, sort of these unintentional landscape metaphors that are popping up. And that is it. Thank you so much for listening.
Yes, absolutely. So I love that you started us off by talking about building your iconography and your visual language and how you're taking us through that. And so I would love for you to chat a little bit more about how you want folks to experience the language and the iconography that you have built. Like what is your hope and expectation for folks when they do experience these works or experience many of your works, right? Get to know you and then follow you. What is your hope for that?
Um, well, I hope it's somewhat relatable. I mean, I hope um, that the iconography, I hope that it sits in the middle. I'm still trying to be on the threshold, and I do think paintings, once they leave my studio, are just as open to any interpretation as my own. So I hope that they can relate to that language, and also notice that it's maybe not their own language, and the changes and the differences there. And and uh, and I hope they can, like, yeah, I guess that's what I would say. It'll have its own life, right? But I do think that my job as an artist is to be reactive. So I'm reacting to my world, and I have found that people have some of those same reactions, or maybe they don't, but they can possibly relate to it or notice something that maybe they never had noticed before. Um, Maybe they don't really look at the landscape when they're driving, but I think everybody does a little bit. Yeah,
At least a little bit.
at least a little bit.
So, you mentioned a little bit earlier on in the new school painting the
Oh,
importance of perspective, and that's really clear in your work. But it's also really clear that people see kind of they get a little peek behind the curtain. It's not you're giving us sight lines and things like that. So can you talk a little bit more about the importance of perspective and leaving clues and having multiple perspectives within one work?
sure. Yeah. So yeah, I do leave a lot of sight lines, and I do like to be obvious about how I'm using perspective. Um, I've tried multiple horizons before. And you know, it's a system. The folks who say they invented linear perspective um, considered themselves scientists, not artists. So it's a way of translating 3D space into 2D space that's using a theory. And I like the idea that the theory is rules that can be broken. You know, it's not the same way that we see the world through our eyes because we have two, and perspective is using 1 point often or 2 points. But it's not, we're kind of constantly doing this with our eyes, and perspective asks you to be really still. I guess I don't want it to be like I'm pretending that it's a real building or a real. I want it to be walkable, but I also want it to be visibly constructed, we'll say, And I think the perspective makes it clear that it is a construction and not necessarily um, an illusion completely.
You also, so yeah, you definitely kind of sit in this liminal space
Mhm.
between ominous and beautiful. And I'm curious, how do you know when you have kind of hit the sweet spot? Are you going back and forth and pushing and pulling, or talk a little bit about how you identified that you have met those criterias for sitting in the middle?
Yeah, that's a good question. I would say it. I don't always hit the sweet spot. Um, but yes, there's definitely like a physical painting in and painting out. So there's a lot of times where I'll paint something in and then spend a lot of time covering it up or taking it out or um, changing it completely. I really love push and pull, and I really um, like my painting go to often seems to be bringing the background into the foreground. So that also pushes that space so it's not so illusory, it's not so deep because then you're pushing the background up to the front. So I don't know. I mean, it's like when asking when is a painting done, when it leaves the studio, I guess. I don't know.
That's a great
Um,
answer. You got to ask it though, because some folks
right.
have differing answers, and it's nice to explore that with the different voices.
Yeah. Yeah. And I do think that's a good question of like, when do you, because I mean, looking back at a lot of my work, some of it's way more abstract than these. So I think it's changing all the time for me. It might be just what is the painting I did before, and maybe I'm just changing it because the one I just did is different, and I want to, you know,
Got to make sure you balance it out. We do
right.
have a question, and more formally, are you stretching and building your own canvas, especially for the dash cam series, since they're unusually long? And if so, can you talk about that process?
Sure. So the dash cams ones are all on paper. They're on the Arches oil paper that I was talking about that can be painted and drawn upon, and then I'm framing them. And the these paintings, these two big paintings, I stretch them. I don't build canvases this big because I don't have the equipment. So I ask this lovely couple that own Continental Molding in Dayton to build me the stretcher bars, and then I stretch the canvas. I oftentimes will stretch the canvas on the wall and paint on the wall for a while, and then maybe at 75%, I'll stretch it on the bars. I don't love to do that too late in the process because it can crack. But at some point, I will put it on the bars and then paint. And that's just like if you go to a residency, you're not going to bring massive bars, right? You're going to like paint on the wall and then bring it back and stretch it. And that was the same with Oberlin. I didn't want to haul bars back and forth from Oberlin. So painted on big canvas, stretched on the wall, and then stretched it when I got back. But yes, I mostly do it myself unless it's the bars, building the bars. Cause I also want to use the underpins, like have underpins and have, so those are machines I don't own. So, um, but I did work in a picture framing shop for years. So then at that point, I did make my own bars.
And
Yeah.
then I think for this last little question, so for the piece on the right, you're implementing the framing of a car window or a plane window as a
Hmm.
piece of it. How then do you define which works receive that treatment versus the one on the left, which does not have that kind of framing?
Well, the one on the right, I don't know if you can tell from this picture, but it has the framing on three sides, but not the left one. And the reason for that is that it's another entrance point. It was like I wanted to have one side that was open, another way of controlling the way of walking into it. So it's not, and this one too is just kind of a border. It's not necessarily meant to reference a particular mode of transportation. Um, and then with this one, um, I mean, I want to say that I had a really good reason. It could have just been practical. Like it didn't really work. And maybe, I mean, also this like bridge thing sort of does it anyway. So um I think it was just kind of the shape of this was already like a film still or a camera still from the dash cam shape because that's really what the shape kind of was this like long skinny shape. And so I did it sort of in a different way. I can't tell you that it was meaningful, except that it was. I'm sort of doing it in its own way anyway.
Yeah, I mean, it makes sense that you make a tool and use it as you see fit. Like, not, it shouldn't be something that limits you, but something that expands. So I totally get that, and it absolutely that arc
Yeah.
gives the echo of it. So it's really lovely. Is there any last thing you would like to leave us with for your artist talk?
No, thanks for coming. Thanks for listening.
Wonderful. Laura, thank you again for the generosity of your time and talent. And thank you all for joining us for this artist talk as a part of the programming series for Shared State. A special thank you to the curators, Jordan and Natalie, as well as the our Ohio, excuse me, the Ohio Arts Council's board, the Ohio legislature, and the governor who support the Ohio Arts Council, this great space, and of course, Ohio artists. Thanks, everyone, and have a great day.